Good evening. Today is the fourth day of October. Here in Chico, California, we're bringing you a synthetic sequence to wrap up the course of science and humanity. These are far reaching statements which must be at least approached because science must have a goal. I have endeavored to address the goals of science as part of my course on this earth, and so I bring to you some thoughts that may help you. The purpose of communication is to help each other. The purpose of our communicating with each other is to fulfill a blueprint that involves communication. In science, we use a certain form of communication that is restricted. It is meant to be restricted. And this security loophole has, of course, been violated because of the sin of men. And so we find technology serves two purposes that are at cross purposes with respect to humanity. In the course of science, we find technology and we must deal with it as rational humans born into a specific situation that entails a course of history. History is time that has been enacted thus far. History is what has already passed beyond us into the past, which is forever pulling, from our perspective, everything that we are in some direction. This would be the past. We also feel, as a commensurate effect of this pulling into the past of whatever is now, that there must be a future, and this we fully accept. The future and the past are entirely different realms because of the division that occurs in our consciousness. So consciousness and reality are intimately related. They have come up for review, as is inevitable, and in fact is part of a continuing course in science. So none of this is new, and yet things become new because we discover more. In the effort to utilize our rational logical system, we encounter the design of the universe, which is the first aspect of the universe that correlates with what we are, is structure. This structure we give various names. The structure, of course, is something that is quite abstract. It is some structure. So there are structures that fit within a larger structure. So this matter of structure is a dimensioned concept. And so structure is not exactly what we would call measurement. Rather, it is relationships. And these are dealt with relational logic. In mathematics, this is called geometry. Geometry is traditionally centered on the earth. For obvious reasons, we are on earth. So our consciousness is intimately bound with this frame of reference which we find ourselves in. Now, this matter of being in it is something that perplexes us because of certain paradoxes that surround time. Because it has a past and it has a future, therefore it must have a now, which would be the balance of future and past. That would be the moving point of now. The moving point of now is subject to some force, but this is force construed in an abstract sense. That the motion of time we feel, it propels us into the future and it drags away our past. These are very abstract statements which might be substantial or not, but we begin by pointing out the obvious. That's what it seems to be to us. So time is a concept that is embedded in some space, which we would then call the space of time. Now, as you may be aware, Albert Einstein has managed to make a direct correlation between these two realms. Which realms? The realm of space and the realm of time. Time is something that we construe as involving motion of some kind, because this is the equivalent of position. In positional space, we call this space. This is the spatial space, where position rules spatial space, because in order to have spatial space, you must have a position. So this would be the proton. It occupies a position in space, and nobody can deny that. Why? It makes a center in space. So that is a particle. A particle is that which makes a center in space, but you know it's not precisely a linear concept. This matter of linearity and something else, which would be curvature, are two abstract realms. In mathematical or in geometric terms, linear spatial separation is one form of metricizing space, which would be spatial space, nothing to do with time. So why was Albert able to correlate time and space? It is because there is a direct conjugal relationship which he discovered. This direct conjugal relationship is one of the most precious items in its class that can be discovered by a mortal human being. It is a relationship that persists. What is this relationship? Let us be clear on what we're attempting to define here. It's non-numeric. It's non-numeric. If there is a numeric aspect to it, which of course there is, we will come to that, but we're not dealing with numbers at this time. We're dealing with relationships, which is pure structure. These are so intimately related that you and I will presume here, were both taught in the same way what is geometry and what is mathematics. They correlate directly. So mathematics and geometry are considered to be one thing. And this is a most interesting unification of two rather separate ideas, although it has been substantiated, and I may be one of the most advanced authorities in that area at this time, because I've perceived a direct relationship that escaped the attention of such notables as Albert Einstein and Paul Dirac. They were seeking something which could not be found using a geometry that they were forced to use called Euclidean. They were also forced, because it's Euclidean geometry, to use the Euclidean mathematical system, which is based on a reference frame of 0. Euclid was not perfectly aware of that, although he did state it perfectly in geometric terms, that a point has no dimension. The fact that a point has no dimension is an axiomatic statement, and that is the first statement in Elements, the most famous book ever published on the face of the earth. In one category, it is the beauty pageant contest. You could say the Bible could be another beauty pageant contest for Miss Universe in this. What is the most important aspect of what we're looking at in science? Is it geometry or is it mathematics? That is an extremely difficult question to answer because it is both and they are related. How are they related? What are they? One of the things that are being related is geometry, which is structure. The other aspect of the duality, and it is a duality, besides the geometry, which is purely relationships, is the mathematics, which is based on a relationship of equality. Now, equality, you could say, must be exact, but if you are not precise about what you mean by that, you may end up with a calculus, infinitely transcendental irrational numbers, which is of course exactly what we're saddled with, both in the complex number system and in the calculus, and in fact with sine cosine. The parameterization of the plane is Euclidean. That's the basis of science. The parameterization of the plane. What is the plane? We have not introduced this notion of a plane. It is the flat surface which we ordinarily construe as being Cartesian. In other words, it is an xy plane. So it's parameterized on two numbers, x and y. The horizontal aspect and the vertical aspect. This is the plane in Euclidean construction. That is not the correct construction of the plane, except in a superpositional sense, which introduces the concept of superposition, which is critical because it is something that has been discovered in science in the 20th century that has not been as integrated as it might be. The concept of superposition introduces a different form of logic that is different from what? What makes superpositional logic different? And in order to answer that question, you would have to know different from what? What is it about superpositional logic that makes it different from the other kind of logic? You would have to be begging the question here, what is the standard form of logic? Binary. Binary logic. However, that actually has two meanings. So binary is a critical term. Binary is a term that you've undoubtedly heard. Binary logic is the basis of certain concepts. Binary logic implies what? What is binary logic? And how would you define it in context of science? Why am I saying, or at least implying strongly, that there are now two forms of logic? It is because we've ever and always used one form of logic, but we discovered in the 20th century a new form of logic that the universe prefers. The universe prefers a different form of logic than that form of logic to which we are accustomed. And so now we are going to define the two forms of logic, one of which is new. The old one that you and I are so familiar with that we may not be perfectly aware of what it is that we are so familiar with, which is binary logic. Binary means true and false. You can also think of it in terms of circuit logic, in which case the true and false translates directly to on and off. And on and off is still too abstract. On and off what? Logic gate. A logic gate will receive a pulse, and then the logic of the system will be translated according to the gate logic of the system. If it's a binary gate logic system, then you have a binary system. That is the logic system that is used on computers. Electronic computers, the like of which you're undoubtedly using right now as you're listening to this lecture. The image and the audio track are being transmitted to your visual system through the screen, which is being generated, as you know, by an electronic system of such incredible complexity that it defies analysis. At this point in time, the computerized systems that we're accustomed to using are nothing short of miraculous. They are miraculous. And that invokes a certain reaction inside the human organism. Speaking broadly, a human being is affected by this level of communication. We are all aware of that, and there are various rumors, I will just put it broadly, that accompany the new perception of this level of intensive circuitry, whereby we're able to communicate with each other through images which are transmitted at the speed of light. There is a footnote to that because you know it would be a little bit less than the speed of light, but not much. So that would entail perhaps an entire lecture on what is meant by the speed of light. Because it is considered to be an absolute, Einstein premised his